Namaste guys, welcome to our channel Jama Nahi Yaar. Now it's time for another book and this is important one. Everyone must listen or read this book Why Bharat Matter wrote by S. Jaishankar. Start with chapter 1. Presenting a worldview. Calculations, culture and clarity. 3 years ago, in my earlier book The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, I had urged that this is a time for us to engage America, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, bring Japan into play, draw neighbors in, extend the neighborhood, and expand traditional constituencies of support. In the period that has passed, much of this has advanced but, obviously, not equally on all fronts. Some have progressed smoothly, others have been more complicated than expected. In the meantime, the world itself has witnessed deeper transformation. The challenges of a global order in transition have been magnified by the back-to-back impact of the COVID pandemic, the Ukraine conflict and the fighting in West Asia. There is no question that this has now become a much tougher world. For India specifically, the going has been far from easy. Many of the larger concerns have impacted it directly. The changed posture of China on the border, in particular, is a major factor in its strategic calculus. But a determined leadership and a supportive society are helping it to navigate this turbulent era. Rising powers seek stability most of all. India must plan to rise amidst serious unpredictability. International relations for the last quarter of the century have been dominated by 5 phenomena: globalization, rebalancing, multipolarity, impact of technology and the games that nations have always played. Globalization, the most fundamental of them, will only intensify, even though its earlier model of creating dependencies has come under growing challenge. It has led to rebalancing the relative weight of players in the world order. That initially unfolded economically, but its political and cultural facets are now making themselves felt. As it proceeds, rebalancing, in turn, will create multipolarity. A new lot of more consequential powers will separate out, joining those dominant since 1945. This is still work in progress, one could even say in the early stages. Much will increasingly depend on how and with what agenda combinations of states come together. Technology, too, has become more of a game changer than in the past. Its ability to impact the daily routine is much deeper, as indeed the capability to weaponize our normal activities, needs and resources. In fact, the pace has reached a point where we are compelled to think in terms of decades. And then there are the perennial games that nations play, expressed through competitive politics between individual countries or, sometimes, groupings. Each of these phenomena is a key factor in the fashioning of contemporary Indian foreign policy, individually as much as cumulatively. Today, India has to not just prepare for a re-globalization that corrects economic and technology concentrations but also use that opportunity to strengthen comprehensive national power. Given that there is at least as much change as there is continuity in world politics, it is obvious that our approach cannot be overly reliant on muscle memory. Certainly, the structural framework and previous experiences have a critical bearing. But, at the same time, the processes described above that are continually shaping our current existence need to be given full recognition. There are important shifts in power between and within states that are also relevant to the overall calculation. Much of that centers on the US, whose dominance is clearly not what it was in the past. That it has changed is indisputable. What it leads to will be still very much a matter of debate. And recent events have demonstrated that neither its capabilities nor its influence should be underestimated. Reading its new posture right is a challenge in itself, especially when it exercises influence in a more offshore manner. How invested it is in various regions is a natural question, one juxtaposed against the growing presence of other nations, especially China. Political polarization within societies is also a factor that the diplomacy of many states needs to take into account. Domestic changes, in the US as much as China, are compelling some countries to recalibrate their posture accordingly. As geopolitical arenas go, a world long used to thinking of West Asia and Europe as the central theaters of competition is increasingly looking at the Indo-Pacific instead. Even distant countries are, therefore, compelled to come up with their respective Indo-Pacific approaches. The Ukraine conflict and its energy consequences, significant as they may be, are unlikely to dilute this development. Each of these trends also had their own resonance on Indian foreign policy. Handling this volatility effectively has required both intensive strategizing and tactical fine-tuning. Our domestic policies not only ensured recovery from the pandemic but also, thereafter, became the basis for COVID diplomacy. In regard to Ukraine, a political posture took into account not only the imperatives of energy and food security but the broader dynamics of Eurasia as well. On China, a robust deployment on the border was accompanied by conscious constraints on cooperation. With Quad partners, we were one of the few nations who made the transition smoothly between successive administrations so different from each other. But there were also important political calls taken at the right time, including the upgradation of the Quad, creating the 1-2-U2 and devising the IMEC. The exercise of engaging in multiple directions and constantly balancing competitive relationships was also tested in this period. Having invested so much in intensifying cooperation with Europe, harmonizing that with maintaining traditional ties with Russia was not easy. As the North-South divide deepened, undertaking the Voice of the Global South summit at the commencement of the G20 presidency was a timely move. And when multipolarity continued to unfold, the broadening of India's engagement sought to keep pace. The factors that drive the choices of nations have also undergone a profound change in the last few years. Earlier, the established way to measure the advancement of power was to use more orthodox military and economic metrics. Our assessment of opportunities was also more predicated on partnerships between nations. Recent events have, however, introduced many more parameters to evaluate security and calculate gains. And our outlook, be it directly economic or more broadly national security, must adjust accordingly. De-risking the global economy is now a principal preoccupation. For market economies and democratic polities, this focuses on establishing more resilient and reliable supply chains. In the digital domain, we see a parallel emphasis on the importance of trust and transparency. A more decentralized world economy is increasingly perceived as the most viable solution to current anxieties. Such sentiments against economic concentration are only likely to intensify as tech wars gather greater momentum. We must also accept that interdependence, in itself, cannot always be an assured basis for international peace and security. Re-globalization in an open-ended decade will call for trusted collaborations of a kind that will be a new experience for all of us. Saga of a rising power. It is the scenario that confronts India and the world. As they both contemplate and calculate, we are heading into volatility and upheaval, where mitigation and navigation go side by side. In fact, the transformation that we long speculated about is now actually upon us. Externally, India is discovering the merits of converging with like-minded nations, even while maintaining its distinct identity. Its domestic journey enables it to offer new terms of engagement to a growing range of partners. As the most populous nation and currently the fifth largest economy, its salience is underlined by the manner in which it conducted the G20 presidency. The interaction between a changing India and a more dynamic world is clearly novel for both of them. In that situation, the quality of its leadership will make the difference. I have sought to capture the various happenings of a world under exceptional stress and present them as trends against which we assess India's prospects. Like my previous effort, this too is intended to contribute to an ongoing debate in an argumentative society. Major nations that make an impact on the world do so after a defining event. It could be a conflict, a revolution or a major economic shift. Underlying all of them are both a jump in capacities and the character traits of a new player at that level. In India's case, its early diplomacy was eventually constrained by the capability factor. It may have shown up in national security and political challenges, but was actually a cumulative outcome of limited progress in socio-economic and technological fields. But somewhere, there was also the inadequate projection of a great civilization. India's progress has been more staggered than others in its peer group. Today, all these variables are coming together into play as India advances across multiple fronts in a self-supportive manner. Politics, economics, demography, culture and ideas make a potent combination. These deep changes across broad domains are contributing to the creation of the new India. The last decade has witnessed an expansion of India's space and a rise in its international profile. The mandala of its diplomacy has taken a clear form, even as the neighborhood first policy struck roots in the extended neighborhood's advance in all directions. The global footprint is widening too, visible as much in Africa and Latin America as in the Pacific and the Caribbean. Multiple engagements simultaneously with major power centers have also intensified, though not always without challenges. The vaccine Metri strongly reaffirmed credentials as a champion of the South, just as first responder operations highlighted our international commitment. Operations like Kaveri, Ganga, Devi Shakti and Ajay underline that Indians abroad could count on their government during times of difficulty. And a decade that began with the advocacy of yoga is appropriately seeing the espousal of Sri Anna, millets. The journey will continue, but this is a time to take stock and assess what difference we have made. And that exercise will surely bring out why we matter more to the world. At the end of the day, foreign policy is very much about clinically assessing the global landscape and calculating one's prospects. Only if the larger picture is accurately read can the risks and benefits of any course of action be assessed. But no nation plans or acts in a vacuum. It must have a vision for itself, an architecture in mind and objectives to attain. For both practical and cultural reasons, these may not always be spelled out explicitly. But by analyzing the world, describing processes and suggesting solutions, their outlines can nevertheless be discerned. To that extent, this is also a volume to be read between the lines. India's G20 presidency is also instructive in offering insights about how to navigate current world politics. By relentlessly shining the spotlight on the concerns of the global South, we were able to ensure that the G20 returned to its basic mandate of promoting international growth and development. Defining priorities in that regard and devising collective solutions were also objectives that were attained to considerable measure. Faced with the parallel challenges of East-West polarization and North-South divide, each was utilized to mitigate the other problem. A firm diplomatic posture that included some new practices on interim outcomes encouraged consensus to be reached when it really mattered. Taking the initiative to enable the permanent membership of the African Union, was notable in itself and helpful in strengthening the larger narrative. A takeaway from the G20 summit in Delhi was the demonstration that the more ambitious the agenda, the harder it would be for others to play spoilsport. Equally, by nurturing crucial relationships over a period of time, all the participants developed stakes in India's success. Whether it was the manner in which diplomacy was conducted, culture and heritage projected or popular participation was encouraged, the G20 presidency was very much an exercise in the India way. As a practitioner long associated with our diplomacy, there are two responsibilities that I seek to discharge through this book. One is to share the thinking of a rising power with a world that has become increasingly aware of that happening. The other is to communicate the necessity of accurately understanding global developments to our own people. Only then can our nation fully appreciate the opportunities and challenges that lie before it. These twin exercises are, however, united in their cultural underpinnings. After all, this foundation influences our approach to the world as a family, as it does the pluralistic and consultative nature of our society. They shape our political ethos too, just as they promote our democratic choices. The manner in which debates are conducted, decisions reached and positions articulated, all have their own cultural signature. But above all, they bring out the values and ethics that are at the core of our collective personality. Sagas of nations, while developed to grip the imagination of their peoples, are a distillate of wisdom, beliefs and habits. For those whose cultures and traditions came under pressure in difficult periods of history, they are also a crucial motivator. The really great tales offer insights that help to spread influence beyond boundaries and to help propagate messages. It is, therefore, tempting to draw from them lessons that can be applied to the contemporary world. Especially in times of turbulence, episodes and outcomes can provide guidance, offer parallels and strengthen self-belief. Indeed, because epics serve as an instructive way to view the happenings of any period, they remain eternally relevant. Of India's two major epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, it is the latter that is normally associated with statecraft and diplomacy. There are many reasons for this perception, among them the storyline itself. But even that arises from the fact that these two sagas are set in different eras, each with their own behavioral expectations. The Ramayana, which is the earlier one, has purity of thought and nobility of conduct as its central message. In contrast, the Mahabharata is much more a chronicle of human frailty and pursuance of ambition. In today's terminology, we would see one as a quest for the observance of rules and norms, while assessing the other as an exercise in realpolitik. Since the international order cannot be built on unrestrained competition, the quest to establish and uphold standards has always been relevant. This is perhaps even more relevant today in a world that is so much in ferment. The Ramayana could be studied from that perspective, highlighting both the merits and challenges of building a rules-based order. The ethical dimensions of the Ramayana are exceptionally strong as compared to not only the Mahabharata but even to the epics of other cultures. Its grassroots understanding is one of a clear-cut battle of good against evil. This is why it is celebrated through festivals and fables across much of Asia. But even within this template, there are complexities, dilemmas and compulsions that hold lessons for a student of strategy. How goodwill is leveraged, commitments are made, coalitions are built and choices exercised are all graphically illustrated by the narrative. In most cases, the decisions appear obvious, yet, the crucial events have a backstory without which our understanding is not complete. In essence, the Ramayana is a saga of a divine force that assumes human incarnation, Rama, to cleanse the world of evil. In that process, he sets the norms for personal conduct and promotes good governance. For that reason, we may see his rule as the epitome of a rules-based order, known as Ram Rajya. The narrative, as it unfolds, is understandably much more complicated than only these propositions. It begins with building strengths and acquiring capabilities that give Lord Rama, the chief protagonist, his formidable reputation. While subject to various tests, he is able to handle them with a dexterity that prepares him for the final challenge. His relationship with his half-brother Lakshmana is particularly close, though he also commands the affection of his two other siblings, Bharat and Shatrughna. The tale is one of political intrigue, as Rama's stepmother Kaikeyi invokes one of the two boons given by his father Dasharatha to insist on Rama's exile at the very time when he is to be crowned. The abduction, during his forest exile, of his wife Sita by the demon king Ravana is the key event on which subsequent developments are centered. As Rama prepares a campaign to rescue her, a number of stratagems emerge, all of which have found their way into folklore. The 10-day battle in which Rama is ultimately successful is not without its moments of anxiety. The role of Hanuman as his devotee, emissary, resource person and advisor is particularly noteworthy. But whether it is the importance of reliable friends, the challenges of creating coalitions, the dangers of open-ended commitments, the perils of strategic complacency, the value of effective diplomacy or the need for informationized warfare, there is much that today's world can learn from this era. Most of all, the story of Lord Rama is an account of a rising power that is able to harmonize its particular interests with a commitment to doing global good. The tests that he is subjected to encourage strategic creativity. Many of the decision points are those of principle, and the choices are, consequently, less ambiguous. But there are also occasions of self-interest, where the justification for an action stems from a particular need. Lord Rama's intervention in the battle between the monkey kings Vali and Sugriva, explained at length later, is a case in point. It is not without its ethical aspects, it is just that the understanding of ethics is different from its orthodox assumptions. Life is rarely a black and white choice, and appreciating the complexities of decision-making is an essential part of grasping international relations. A major rising power, however, needs more than just an accurate landscape analysis and the ability to act on it. It must, first of all, be confident of its own values and beliefs and base its policies on those convictions. These will draw from the totality of its culture, heritage and traditions. That is why India can only rise when it is truly Bharat. That's it for this video. See you soon. Thank you.